He called me an emotional distraction while our children were growing inside me. I spent Christmas in a delivery room screaming his name, not because I wanted him there, but because I was bringing his twins into the world alone and he had no idea they existed. Now, 11 months later, he's standing at my door in the snow, staring at Carissa and Jones, two toddlers, with his face, his eyes, his DNA, and the man who threw me away like a failed business deal is begging me not to slam the door on the family he abandoned. I don't know if I'm strong enough to forgive him, but I know my children deserve to know if their father is worth a second chance. I can still hear the sound of his briefcase clicking shut. It's the detail that stayed with me, not the words, not the look on his face, not even the way my knees went weak and my vision blurred at the edges. It was that metallic click, sharp, final, expensive, the sound of James Baker closing one chapter and moving on to the next without so much as a backward glance. And here's the thing nobody talks about. When your world ends, it doesn't explode. It just stops. 1 second, you're standing in your kitchen. The next, you're watching your marriage dissolve over email notifications about Dubai hotels. December 19th, 7:43 in the evening. Our penthouse kitchen, all marble and stainless steel and cold, light. That's when my husband looked up from his phone, slid a manila folder across the island, and said the 7 words that ended everything. Lucia, I think we need to divorce. Now, pay close attention to what happened next, because this moment, this is where everything I thought I knew about my husband shattered. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh, to say he was joking, to tell me this was some kind of stress-induced breakdown and we'd work through it like we always did. But James wasn't laughing. He wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were back on the screen, some email about a Dubai acquisition, some deal worth more than our marriage, apparently. My voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. What? I've thought about this for months, he said, still not meeting my eyes. It's not working, Lucia. The marriage, it's holding me back, holding him back, like I was, a weight tied to his ankles. Like I was the reason his empire wasn't expanding fast enough, his stock prices weren't climbing high enough, his name wasn't feared enough in boardrooms across 3 continents. I felt my hands start to shake. James, where's this coming from? We can talk about this. We can. I need focus. His tone was flat. Clinical. The same voice he used in conference calls when he fired executives who didn't meet projections. I need strategic clarity. He paused, and for a brief, desperate second I thought he might take it back. But then he said the words that carved themselves into my chest like a brand. I need less emotional distraction. Emotional distraction. That's what I was. And that decision, that cold, calculated choice he made in 3 seconds, it was about to cost him everything. But he had no idea yet, none at all. Not his wife, not his partner, not the woman who'd stood beside him when his first hotel venture nearly bankrupted him, who'd held him through panic attacks at 3 a.m, who'd loved him when he was still human. A distraction. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat had closed. My lungs had forgotten how to pull air. I watched him tap something on his phone, probably confirming a meeting, scheduling a flight, moving on to the next task on his endless list, and I realized with a sickening clarity that this conversation was already over for him. He'd made his decision weeks ago, maybe months. This wasn't a discussion. It was a notification. The papers are drawn up, he continued, nodding toward the folder like it was a dinner menu. My attorney already reviewed them. You'll be taken care of financially. The settlement is generous. You can keep the place in Moore Ridge if you want. I'll have my assistant coordinate the logistics. Logistics. He was dissolving our marriage and calling it logistics. I don't remember reaching for the folder. I don't remember opening it. But suddenly I was staring at my name, Lucia Marie Gibson Baker, printed in cold, unfeeling typeface next to words like irreconcilable differences, and division of assets and dissolution of marriage. There was a sticky note on the second page, pale yellow, his handwriting, sign page 6, 9, and 14. Initial page 11. That's when something inside me cracked. Not shattered, not yet, but cracked. A fracture running through the center of everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband, my future. James. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else's body. Do you even love me anymore? He finally looked up. And that's what broke me. Because there was nothing in his eyes. No anger, no guilt, no regret, just nothing. The blankness of a man who'd already emotionally checked out, who was 3 steps ahead, already planning his next quarter, his next empire expansion, his next version of himself that didn't include me. I think, he said slowly, carefully, that we both deserve to be with people who make us better. It was the kind of line you'd read in a self-help book, polished, diplomatic, utterly devoid of feeling. And in that moment, I understood. He didn't love me anymore. Maybe he hadn't for a long time. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know yet, was that 6 weeks later, I'd discover I was carrying a secret that would change everything. But we're not there yet. Remember this moment. You'll understand why in just a few minutes. I nodded. Once, twice. My body moving on autopilot while my mind splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Okay, I whispered. James blinked. I think he'd expected me to fight, to cry, to beg. Maybe that would have made it easier for him, proof that I was the emotional mess he convinced himself I was. Proof that leaving was the right decision. But I didn't give him that. I picked up the pen he'd left beside the folder, a Mont Blanc, because of course it was, and I signed my name on page 6, page 9, page 14. I initialed page 11. My hand didn't shake. My tears didn't fall. Not yet. I slid the folder back across the marble island, and this time I was the one who didn't make eye contact. Merry Christmas, James. He flinched. Good. I walked out of that kitchen, out of that penthouse, out of the life I'd built with a man who'd become a stranger in an expensive suit. I took the elevator down 43 floors, and with every floor that passed, I felt myself getting smaller, quieter, less. By the time I reached the lobby, I was hollow. 3 weeks later, James was gone. Moved to his London office. Threw himself into expanding the Baker Hotel empire across Europe. I heard about it through Instagram stories and business news alerts, little digital breadcrumbs that told me he was thriving, flourishing, completely unburdened by the wife he'd left behind. I moved back to Moor Ridge, the little town 2 hours north where I'd grown up, where my parents were buried, where nobody knew who James Baker was and nobody cared. I rented a small house with peeling blue paint and a porch that creaked. I cried for 6 days straight. And then, on the 7th day, I stopped crying. Because that morning, staring at the test in my hands, watching 2 pink lines appear like an accusation, I realized something that would change everything. I was pregnant. And James, the man who'd called me a distraction, who'd signed me out of his life like I was a failed business venture, had no idea he was about to become a father. I tried calling him once. Once, my finger hovered over his name in my contacts for 20 minutes before I finally pressed it. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Then voicemail. You've reached James Baker. Leave a message. I opened my mouth. Closed it. What was I supposed to say? Hey, remember me? The emotional distraction you divorced? Well, surprise, you're going to be a dad. I hung up before the beep. And I never called again. Because here's what I learned that day. Sitting on the bathroom floor of my tiny rental house, one hand on my still flat stomach. James Baker didn't get to take this from me. He'd taken my marriage, my home, my sense of safety. But these lives growing inside me, they were mine. 6 weeks later, the ultrasound technician smiled and said the words that made my heart stop. Congratulations. It's twins. Twins. 2 hearts beating on the monitor. 2 futures I'd have to build alone. 2 pieces of James that he'd never know existed. I should have been terrified. And I was. But I was also something else. Determined. You know what? If you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing, if you've ever been called a distraction by someone who was supposed to love you, leave a comment below. Because stories like this, they need to be told. And if you want to hear how this ends, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to know what happens when James finds out about those twins. Because the man who'd shattered my world was about to miss the most important thing he'd ever be part of. And he'd done it to himself. I whispered it out loud, right there in the examination room, my hands pressed against my belly. You will not take this from me, not again. I had no idea then that 11 months later, James would show up outside a pediatrician's office, his hands shaking, his face older and haunted, staring at two toddlers with his steel blue eyes. I had no idea he'd been carrying a journal full of unsent letters. I had no idea he'd spent a year in therapy, unraveling the same question over and over. Why did I destroy the only good thing I ever had? All I knew, that cold December day, was that James Baker had made his choice. And now I was making mine. The thing about pregnancy is that it doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't care that your life just imploded. It doesn't care that you're sleeping on an air mattress in a house that smells like someone else's cooking. It doesn't care that every morning you wake up and forget for 3 blissful seconds that your marriage is over and then you remember, and the grief hits you all over again like a wave you can't outrun. Pregnancy just happens. And it demands everything. But here's what nobody prepared me for. What comes next will test everything you think you know about strength. Keep watching. The nausea started 2 weeks after I moved to Moore Ridge. At first I thought it was stress. Grief does strange things to your body, makes you tired, makes your appetite disappear, makes you feel like you're walking through water. But this was different. This was relentless. I couldn't keep anything down except saltine crackers and ginger ale. The smell of coffee, which I'd lived on for years, made me sprint to the bathroom. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, bone deep and consuming. That's when I bought the test. I took it in the tiny bathroom of my rental, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. And when those 2 pink lines appeared, sharp and undeniable, I sank onto the cold tile floor and stayed there for an hour. Because I knew what this meant. James's baby. Growing inside me while he was halfway across the world, building his empire, probably not thinking about me at all. That's when I made the call, the one I mentioned. The only time I reached out. I sat on my porch steps, phone pressed to my ear, heart hammering. It rang 4 times, then 5. I imagined him seeing my name on the screen, hesitating, maybe even sending it to voicemail deliberately. But what I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until almost a year later, was that James never saw that call at all. His assistant, Miller, had taken one look at my name and marked it non-urgent, filed it away like junk mail, deleted the notification. Now remember that detail, Miller filtering that call, because when the truth comes out later, it's going to change everything. James never knew I tried to reach him, never knew I'd gathered the courage to tell him, never knew that for one brief moment, I'd been willing to let him back into my life for the sake of our child. When the voicemail kicked in and I heard his voice cold, professional, so utterly him I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave a message that would sit in his inbox like a plea, like I was chasing him, like I needed him. So I hung up, and I decided right then, sitting on that creaking porch with my hand on my stomach, that this was my secret to keep. He'd called me a distraction, fine. He'd walked away without looking back, fine. But this baby, my baby, wasn't going to grow up wondering why daddy didn't want us. The first trimester was brutal. Not just physically, though the morning sickness was relentless and cruel, but emotionally. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and feel the emptiness beside me like a presence. The bed was too big. The house was too quiet. Every creak, every shadow felt like a reminder that I was doing this alone. I started freelancing again, graphic design work, mostly. Small projects I could do from my laptop while lying on the couch with a bucket nearby. The money was inconsistent, but it was mine. Nobody could take it away. Nobody could call it a generous settlement and use it to soothe their conscience. But the loneliness was suffocating. That's when Dawn showed up. I hadn't called her, hadn't told anyone except my doctor that I was pregnant. But Dawn and I had been best friends since elementary school, and she had a way of knowing when I was drowning, even when I was too proud to ask for help. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 suitcases in hand, and said 5 words that made me cry for the first time in weeks. "You're not doing this alone." She moved into the 2nd bedroom that same day, made me soup I could actually keep down, held my hair back when the nausea won, drove me to every appointment. And when I finally told her the whole story, James, the divorce, the call he never answered, she looked at me with fire in her eyes and said something I'll never forget. "That man doesn't deserve to know." Maybe she was right. Maybe he didn't. The pregnancy got harder before it got easier. At 16 weeks, The ultrasound technician went quiet for too long. My heart stopped. Dawn grabbed my hand, and then the technician smiled and turned the screen toward me. Twins, she said. 2 healthy heartbeats. I couldn't breathe. 2 babies. 2 lives that would depend entirely on me. 2 futures I'd have to build from scratch. Dawn squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. And I started crying. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from something else. Something fierce and protective, and bigger than my grief. You will not take this from me, I whispered, staring at those 2 flickering shapes on the screen. Not again. The 2nd and 3rd trimesters blurred together. My body changed in ways that felt foreign and miraculous. I'd catch myself in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back rounder, softer, carrying visible proof of a man who'd abandoned me. People in Moore Ridge were kind but curious. They saw the wedding ring I'd stopped wearing. They saw the lack of a partner at appointments. They made assumptions. I let them. It was easier than explaining that my billionaire ex-husband had no idea he was about to become a father. Dawn kept me sane. She painted the nursery pale yellow, built 2 cribs from IKEA instructions, while I sat on the floor eating pickles and directing, made me laugh when I wanted to cry, reminded me that I was strong enough for this when I was certain I wasn't. And then, on a rainy October night when I was 38 weeks along, my water broke. I'd imagined labor 1,000 times. In those fantasies, there was always someone holding my hand, always someone telling me I could do this. Always someone who'd look at our child with the same awe I felt. Reality was different. Reality was Dawn driving 90 miles an hour to the hospital, while I gripped the door handle and breathed through contractions that felt like my body was splitting apart. Reality was 16 hours of labor, 16 hours of pain that rewrote my understanding of what my body could endure. Reality was a delivery room with fluorescent lights and a nurse who kept calling me honey, in a voice that was kind but detached. And reality was the moment they placed Carissa in my arms, tiny, red-faced, screaming, and 3 minutes later, Jones. 2 babies. My babies. With James's dark hair. James's sharp nose. James's impossible blue eyes. I looked at them and felt my heart crack open in a way I didn't know was possible. Hi, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Hi, my loves. I'm your mama. And I'm never leaving you. Dawn was crying too, standing at the foot of the bed with her phone out, taking pictures I'd treasure forever. The nurse smiled. Do they have names? Carissa, I said, kissing her forehead. And Jones. I didn't give them James's last name. They were Gibson's. Mine. The first 3 months were survival mode. Sleep became a myth. I learned to function on 2-hour increments, stumbling through feedings and diaper changes in a fog of exhaustion. Dawn was a saint. She took night shifts, learned to swaddle better than I could, sang lullabies in a voice that somehow always calmed Jones when he wouldn't stop crying. My freelance work dried up. I couldn't focus long enough to complete projects. Money got tight. The house was always a mess, bottles in the sink, laundry piled on every surface, toys scattered across floors I hadn't vacuumed in weeks. But then, Carissa smiled at me for the first time. Not a gas smile. Not a reflex, a real smile. Her whole face lit up when I walked into the room, like I was her whole world. And something inside me healed. Not completely, not the broken parts James had left behind, but something new grew in those cracks, something stronger. I started taking the twins for walks in their double stroller, looping through Moore Ridge's quiet streets. People would stop and coo over them, ask their names, tell me I was doing a great job, and slowly, painfully, I started believing them. By the time the twins turned 6 months old, I'd found a rhythm, a life. Freelance clients trickled back. Dawn moved back to her own place, but visited constantly. I learned to laugh again, to sleep more than 4 hours at a stretch, to imagine a future that didn't revolve around grief. James became a memory. Distant, unreal, like a character from a story I'd once read but could barely recall. I told myself he was gone forever. That he'd never know about Carissa and Jones. That we were better off without him. And for 11 months, I believed it. I had no idea that in a few short weeks, I'd be standing in a pediatrician's parking lot, watching my ex-husband's face go white as he stared at the 2 toddlers in front of him. I had no idea he'd been falling apart while I was building myself back up. I had no idea that the man who'd called me a distraction had spent a year in therapy, writing letters he'd never send, trying to understand why he'd destroyed everything. All I knew was that I'd survived. And that was enough. Or so I thought. The pediatrician's office always smelled like lemon disinfectant and crayons. It was one of the few places I'd started to feel safe, routine, predictable. The waiting room chairs were the same worn blue vinyl every time. The fish in the tank by the window swam lazy circles. The same cartoon played on the television mounted in the corner. The sound turned low enough to be background noise, instead of a headache. Safe. That word would mean something very different by the end of that day. "Shoes, Mama," Jones announced proudly, lifting one sneakered foot as we stepped into the lobby. "Yes, baby, you have your shoes," I said, shifting Carissa higher on my hip. "That's because you refused to let me take them off for nap time." He grinned, completely unbothered. At 18 months, Jones had inherited his father's stubbornness and my ability to make jokes in the middle of chaos. Carissa snuggled against me, clutched her favorite purple mitten in one hand like a lifeline. "Hi, Lucia," the receptionist smiled without looking up from her screen. "You're right on time. Doctor's running a bit behind, as usual." "No problem," I said, settling into one of the blue chairs. "We come with snacks. We're prepared for war." I handed Jones a small container of crackers and pulled a board book from the diaper bag for Carissa. Moments like this were quiet, victories normal, ordinary, blessedly James-free. 11 months. That's how long it had been since I'd heard his name out loud. I'd built a life in that silence. "Truck," Jones declared, pointing to a picture in the book. "Yes, that's a truck. And what's this?" "Dog." Carissa leaned back to look at me, her dark hair curling at the ends, her blue eyes, his blue eyes, serious. "Mama," she said softly, as if reminding me of my role in this tiny universe. "I'm right here," I whispered, kissing her temple. If someone had told me, in that moment, that my past was standing just outside those glass doors, I would have laughed. And then the nurse opened the door to the inner hallway. "Gibson, you're up next. Doctor just needs a few more minutes. You can wait in room 3. Jones jumped up, crumbs flying. "Go, Mama." I gathered bags, babies, snacks, my sanity held together with spit and determination, and followed the nurse down the hallway lined with cartoon murals. We passed an exam room where a toddler wailed in protest, and another where a baby giggled uncontrollably. Life. So much life. "Room 3's all yours," the nurse said, holding the door. "You know the drill." The exam room was small, and familiar white walls, height chart, scale in the corner, the exam table covered in fresh crinkly paper. I helped Jones climb onto one of the chairs and set Carissa down, her little boots tapping against the step stool. "I'll just run back to the car," I told them, mentally calculating what I'd forgotten. Of course. The folder. Because why would I bring the medical folder into the medical building? Jones blinked at me solemnly. "Snack?" "Yes, General. Guard the snacks. I'll be right back." 2 minutes. I stepped into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar, and walked back toward the waiting room. The lemon crayon smell followed me. My hand was already reaching for the strap of my bag when I saw it through the glass. A black sedan parked in the drop-off zone. At first, it was nothing, just a car. Nice, sure, but people with money lived in the suburbs too. Then the driver's door opened. Sunglasses, tailored charcoal coat, the kind of posture you develop from years of owning every room you walk into. For a second, my brain refused to connect the dots. It had been almost a year. People change in a year. Faces shift, lines form. But then he turned his head, and the world narrowed to a tunnel. "James." My breath stopped. Not metaphorically, literally. My lungs forgot how to work. The sounds of the waiting room, the TV, the soft hum of the air conditioner, a child giggling faded into a distant buzz. He looked wrong. And this is the part you need to really understand. Because what happened to James in that year? It's not what you think. Thinner. Like someone had taken the man I knew and run him through a wash cycle too many times. His sharp jaw was more prominent, cheeks hollowed just enough to make his eyes seem larger, darker. His hair, always perfectly styled, was slightly longer, pushed back like he'd been raking his hands through it, and there were lines now. At the corners of his mouth, between his brows, Stress had finally left its fingerprints on James Baker. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself. My fingers went numb. Heat pricked behind my eyes even as cold rushed through my veins. "No," I whispered, barely aware I'd spoken. He hadn't seen me yet. He was standing beside the car, one hand braced on the roof, the other clenched at his side. For the first time since I'd known him, his body language didn't radiate control. He looked unsteady. Then he lifted his head. Our eyes met through the glass. Time didn't just slow, it fractured. For a heartbeat, I was back in our penthouse kitchen, his voice flat as he talked about distraction and strategic clarity. For another, I was in the delivery room, screaming, pushing, alone. 11 months, hundreds of nights, thousands of tears. And now he was here. "Lucia," he breathed, his lips forming my name even before he reached the door. Instinct screamed at me to run, to turn back down the hallway, lock myself in the exam room, wedge a chair under the handle, and pretend I didn't exist, to protect the little world I'd built from the hurricane standing outside. Instead, my feet stayed rooted. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and suddenly, he was there, 5 feet away, the scent of his cologne, once comforting, now weaponized by memory cutting through the lemon disinfectant. Up close, the changes were even more obvious. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. His usually flawless shave had been replaced by the faintest shadow of stubble. His hands, always so steady when signing deals worth millions, were trembling. "Lucia," he said again, voice rough. You look." "Don't," I snapped. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." He swallowed. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two ghosts who'd once been married, now standing in the fluorescent light of a pediatrician's waiting room like some cruel joke. "What are you doing here?" I managed, my voice low, tight. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. He glanced around, as if the chairs and fish tank were suddenly too intimate an audience. I needed to talk to you." I let out a humorless laugh. "You needed to talk to me? Now? After a year of silence?" His jaw flexed. Once, that would have been my cue to back down, to smooth things over. Now, it just made me angrier. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything," he said quietly. "But please, just give me 5 minutes. I flew here this morning. I've been looking for you for weeks. I didn't even know if you still." "How did you find me?" I cut in. The idea of his world, his people, his resources pushing their way into the fragile life I'd built made my skin crawl. He hesitated, then exhaled. More ridge was in the divorce documents. I didn't look right away, but eventually I repeated. "Right. After your empire, your image, your schedule, all cleared up enough to pencil in the woman you left." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, pain, something I didn't trust. "Lucia, I know I did this wrong," he said, taking a tentative step closer. I stepped back. "I know I hurt you. That's not even close to enough to describe it. I've gone over that night 1,000 times and..." "Then stop," I said. "Stop going over it. It's done. You made your choice." He shook his head. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day wishing I could?" "Lucia?" A nurse's voice called faintly from the hallway behind me. "Everything okay out here?" I didn't take my eyes off James. "We're fine. Just give me a second." The nurse nodded and disappeared. James's gaze followed the direction of her voice, then returned to my face, confusion creasing his brow. Are you here for an appointment?" I almost laughed again. Pediatrician's office. My age. The diaper bag strap still digging into my shoulder. Connect the dots, James. But of course, he didn't. His world had never required him to notice small details. People brought him summaries, reports, clean conclusions. He'd built an empire on big pictures and bottom lines. "It doesn't matter why I'm here," I said, defensive heat rising in my chest. "What matters is that you shouldn't be." "I had to see you," he insisted, softer now. I needed to explain. That night, what I said, what I did, it wasn't the whole story. I stared at him. "Explain." The word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. For a year, I'd imagined explanations, excuses, justifications, affairs, secret lives, hidden addictions, a million angles that all ended the same way. He'd left. What could you possibly say? I asked slowly. That would make any of that better. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction. Probably nothing. But you still deserve to hear it. I opened my mouth to answer, to tell him I didn't want his explanations, his guilt, his retroactive attempts at decency when I heard it. The patter of small feet. Mama! Time didn't just slow this time. It stopped. Jones barreled down the hallway, giggling, one fist clenched around a crumpled plastic snack bag, the other stretched out as he ran. His curls bounced, his cheeks were flushed. One of his shoes wasn't fully on. Now here's where I need you to pay attention, because what you do in this moment, I want to know. Would you protect the secret? Would you tell the truth? Drop a comment below and let me know. Because what happened next changed everything. Jones, I started, instinctively dropping my voice into the gentle warning tone I used when he got too excited. He ignored me completely, as toddlers do. He crashed into my leg, wrapping one arm around it for balance. His eyes, those familiar, steel blue eyes, shone as he looked up at me. Then, at the stranger, standing inches away. Behind him, moving more cautiously, Carissa toddled forward, one mitten still in her hand, the other dangling from between her teeth where she'd apparently decided to carry it. She stopped just behind Jones, half hidden by my leg, peeking around with wide curiosity. James went utterly still. His gaze dropped to Jones, to the dark hair, the shape of his face, the color of his eyes, all the blood drained from his. The world narrowed to 4 people in a too-bright lobby. A man who'd run from his fear, a woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes, and 2 children who had no idea they were standing at the center of an earthquake. "Da," Jones said experimentally, pointing a cracker-sticky finger in James's direction before jamming it into his own mouth. "Not Dad. Just a sound, a syllable, a coincidence." But I saw the way it hit James. His lips parted, his hand shot out toward the back of a chair, gripping it so hard his knuckles went white. For a second, I thought he might actually pass out. Carissa shifted closer to me, frowning at the sudden tension, her mitten dropping to the floor with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should. No one spoke. The fish swam lazy circles in their tank. A child laughed somewhere behind us. The overhead lights hummed, and James stared at the 2 little people at my feet like he'd just seen ghosts. "Lucia," his voice cracked on my name. He swallowed. Tried again. Are they? My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. This was the moment I'd avoided, outrun, denied in 1,000 imaginary scenarios. I could lie. I could say no. Say I was remarried. Say they weren't his. Say anything to protect the fragile life I'd built. But Carissa chose that moment to step forward, her tiny hand brushing against James's pant leg as she reached for her fallen mitten. She looked up at him, really looked, and for the briefest second, their eyes locked. His blue, hers, identical. I saw the truth land in him like a blow. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said quietly. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me. I forced the words out, each one heavy and irrevocable. "They're yours, James. Both of them." Silence. For 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. The man newspapers called the Ice King, the unshakable billionaire, the boardroom legend, the man who'd handed me divorce papers like a business memo, swayed on his feet. His knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the back of the chair just in time, fingers digging into the vinyl. "Mine?" he whispered, eyes never leaving their faces. "They're mine?" Panic surged up my spine, hot and choking. Because in that instant, as I watched his carefully constructed world implode in his eyes, I realized something terrifying. I had spent a year preparing myself to live without him. I had not prepared myself at all for what it would mean if he wanted back in. I didn't invite him into my life. I didn't offer coffee, sympathy, or a seat at my kitchen table. What I did after a nurse helped me gather the twins and assured us the pediatrician could see us another day was tell James to meet me at Riverside Park in 2 hours. Public. Neutral. A place where I could leave whenever I wanted. A place where he couldn't corner me with his explanations and those haunted eyes. Dawn showed up at my house within 20 minutes of my frantic call. "He's here?" she hissed, scooping Carissa into her arms while Jones clung to my leg. James? That James? The one who… Yes. My hands were still shaking. He saw them, Dawn. He knows. Her face went through a dozen emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, fury, protectiveness, and finally grim resignation. What are you going to do? I don't know. I pressed my palms against my eyes. He said he needs to explain, that there's more to the story, and I told him. I trailed off. Told him what? That I'd listen. Dawn set Carissa down gently, then turned to me with the same expression she'd worn when we were 16, and she'd found me crying in the school bathroom over my first heartbreak. Lucia, you don't owe him anything. I know. He left you. He doesn't get to just show up and… I know, I repeated, firmer this time. But he saw them, Dawn. He saw Jones and Carissa, and he almost collapsed. I've never seen him like that. Not once, in the entire time we were married. She studied me for a long moment. And you think that means something? I think, I said slowly, that if I don't hear him out, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what he would have said. Dawn sighed. Fine. But I'm keeping the twins. And if you're not back in 3 hours, I'm calling the police and reporting a kidnapping. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Deal. Riverside Park was nearly empty when I arrived. November had stripped the trees bare, leaving skeletal branches against a gray sky. A few joggers passed by, breath clouding in the cold. A woman threw a ball for a golden retriever that bounded through fallen leaves. Normal people living normal lives. And then there was me, walking toward the man who'd destroyed me, about to hear why. James was already there, standing by the railing that overlooked the water. He'd ditched the sunglasses. His coat collar was turned up against the wind, and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets. He looked small. That was the word that came to mind. Small, diminished. Like someone had taken the larger-than-life figure I'd known and shrunk him down to something almost human. Lucia. He turned when he heard my footsteps and relief flooded his face. You came. I said I would. I stopped several feet away, arms crossed. A barrier. A reminder that proximity didn't equal trust. You have 1 hour. Then, I'm leaving. He nodded quickly. Okay, yes, thank you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A gust of wind rattled the branches overhead. The river below moved slowly, dark and cold. Finally, James exhaled a shaky breath. I don't know where to start. Try the beginning, I said flatly. The night you decided I was a distraction. He flinched. Good. I was wrong, he said quietly. About all of it, but especially that. Then why did you say it? His jaw worked. He stared at the water like it might offer him answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was terrified. I blinked. Of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. Terrified, I repeated, skepticism sharp in my tone. Of what? Your quarterly profits dipping? A bad article in Forbes? Of becoming my father. The words hung in the cold air between us. I knew James's father had died when James was in college. Heart attack at 48. I knew James rarely talked about him. I knew there was pain there, old and buried. But I didn't know this. My father, James continued, still not looking at me, collapsed in his office 3 weeks after telling me I was a failure. My breath caught. I was 23, home from business school for the holidays. I just told him I wanted to start my own company instead of taking over his. He called me ungrateful, reckless, said I was throwing away everything he'd built. James's hands clenched into fists in his pockets. He said I'd end up ruining everyone around me the way he'd ruined my mother. James. She left when I was 8, he said, voice hollow, packed a suitcase one morning and walked out. I didn't understand why for years. But my father told me the truth that night. He said he'd been so obsessed with building his business that he forgot he had a family, that by the time he looked up from his desk, she was already gone. He turned to face me then, and the raw pain in his eyes was so intense, I had to look away. 3 weeks later, he had a massive heart attack, died at his desk, surrounded by contracts and spreadsheets and everything he chose over the people who loved him. James's voice cracked, and the last thing he ever said to me was that I'd do the same thing. I felt my chest tighten. When we got married, he continued, I promised myself I'd be different, that I'd build my empire and keep you, that I could balance it all. He laughed bitterly. But the bigger the company grew, the more I saw him in myself. The late nights, the obsession, the way I started thinking about acquisitions during dinner, the way I'd hear you talking and realize I hadn't listened to a single word. "You could have told me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We could have worked on it together." "I know." He looked broken. But I convinced myself that the problem wasn't my choices. It was the marriage itself. That if I just removed the distraction, I could focus, be better, build something that would prove my father wrong. "So you left me." "I destroyed us," he corrected, "to avoid becoming the man who destroyed his family. And in doing that, I became him anyway." The wind picked up, colder now. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, trying to process everything he'd just said, trying to reconcile this version of James vulnerable, self-aware, drowning in regret, with the cold stranger who'd slid divorce papers across marble countertops. "When did you figure this out?" I asked. "Too late." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather journal, worn at the edges. "I started therapy 4 months after you left. My board threatened to remove me because I was unraveling, missing meetings, making reckless decisions. They said I needed help or I'd lose everything." He held out the journal. I didn't take it. "It's letters," he said quietly. "To you." My therapist suggested I write down everything I couldn't say. So I did. Every week, sometimes every day. He opened it, and I saw pages filled with his angular handwriting. "There are 63 letters in here, Lucia. 63 apologies you never got to read." My throat burned. "Read one," I said, out loud. His hand trembled as he flipped to a page near the middle. "February 14th, he read, voice rough. "I saw a woman today who laughed like you. That same bright, unguarded sound. I stood there on the street like an idiot, just listening, and for 5 seconds, I forgot you were gone. Then I remembered, and it felt like losing you all over again. I left to protect you from me. I became the danger I was afraid of. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if I can. But I know I'd give every dollar, every deal, every piece of this empire just to hear you laugh again, just once. Just to know you're okay." He closed the journal. I couldn't speak. A jogger passed us, sneakers crunching on gravel. The river kept moving. "There's something else," James said, and now his voice carried a thread of anger, not at me, but at someone. "That call you made, 6 weeks after I left." My heart stopped. "How do you know about that?" "Because I fired Miller last month, and when I had IT pull his correspondence records, I found it." His jaw clenched. He filtered it, marked it non-urgent, and deleted the notification. "I never saw your name. Never knew you tried to reach me." The world tilted. You didn't know?" "I swear to you, Lucia, I had no idea you called. If I'd seen it," he stopped, swallowing hard. "If I'd known you were trying to tell me something, anything, I would have answered. No matter what." I felt something crack inside me. For 11 months, I'd carried the weight of that unanswered call. I'd convinced myself he'd seen my name and chosen not to pick up. That even when I'd tried, I wasn't worth his time. But he'd never known. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, softer now. "About the twins?" "Because you left," I shot back, anger flaring. "You called me a distraction and walked away. What was I supposed to do? Chase you? Beg you to care? You should have told me I was going to be a father. You should have answered your damn phone." We stared at each other, both breathing hard, years of pain and misunderstanding crackling in the space between us. Finally, James looked away. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. I destroyed everything, and then I compounded it by being unreachable." He paused. "For what it's worth, the empire I chose over you nearly collapsed anyway. Without you, I fell apart. The board lost faith. Investors got nervous. Everything I sacrificed us for almost disappeared." "Good," I said coldly. He nodded. "I deserved that." I hated how much I wanted to believe him. Hated how the journal in his hands felt like proof of something I'd spent a year telling myself didn't exist. Remorse, growth, change. "James," I said carefully, "I don't know what you want from me." "I want," he trailed off, then tried again. "I want a chance to be in their lives, in Jones and Carissa's lives. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to go back to anything we were. But please, don't shut me out of knowing them. I looked at him, really looked. This wasn't the man I'd married. That man had been confident, controlled, untouchable. This man was broken glass, held together by therapy and regret. I had no idea who he was anymore. And I didn't know if that terrified me or gave me hope. I need time, I said finally. I'll give you as much as you need. And if I decide the answer is no? Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. Then I'll respect that, even if it destroys me. I turned to leave, then stopped. James? Yeah? Stop writing letters to me. I met his eyes. If you have something to say it to my face. For the first time since he'd appeared outside that pediatrician's office, James Baker smiled. It was small, sad, and achingly genuine. Okay, he whispered. And I walked away, leaving him by the river with his journal and his ghosts, wondering if the man who broke me could ever be the father my children deserved. I didn't sleep the night before James was supposed to visit. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, wondering what kind of mother invites a stranger into her children's lives, because that's what he was now, wasn't it? A stranger who happened to share their DNA. Dawn had been less diplomatic. You're letting him visit? She'd said when I called to tell her. Lucia, he had his chance. He walked away. I know. You don't owe him this. I know that too. I'd pressed my fingers against my temples, fighting the headache that had been building since Riverside Park. But they deserve the chance to know their father. If he's really changed? If he's really trying? And if he hasn't? That was the question that kept me awake until dawn broke gray and cold through my bedroom window. What if this was just another version of James's control? Another way to manage the fallout of his choices? What if he played dad for a few weeks and then disappeared when it got too hard, too messy, too real? I couldn't protect myself from that heartbreak, but I could try to protect Jones and Carissa. At 9:30 in the morning, I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. My stomach dropped. I'd spent the last hour cleaning, not because I cared what James thought of my house, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The twins were in the living room, Jones building a tower out of blocks, while Carissa conducted a very serious conversation with her stuffed elephant. Normal, safe, mine. The knock on the door was soft, tentative. Nothing like the confident James I'd known. I took a breath, smoothed my hands down my jeans, and opened the door. He stood on my porch, looking like a man approaching the gallows. No suit today. Just dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger, more uncertain. His hair was still slightly too long, curling at the edges. His hands were clenched at his sides, and I could see them trembling even from where I stood. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." For a moment we just looked at each other. Two people who'd once promised forever and delivered devastation instead. "Thank you," James said. "For this, for letting me," his voice caught. "Thank you." I stepped back, opening the door wider. They're in the living room. But James? I caught his arm as he moved to pass me. "If this is too much for you, if you can't handle it, tell me now, because I won't let you hurt them." He met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't offense or defensiveness. It was understanding. "If I hurt them," he said quietly, "I'll never forgive myself, and neither should you." I released his arm and led him down the short hallway. The house was small, nothing like the penthouse he was used to. Scuffed hardwood floors, mismatched furniture, toys scattered across every surface. The kitchen table, visible from the living room, still had breakfast dishes stacked beside the sink. This was real life. Messy, imperfect, beautiful in ways his world had never been. James stopped in the doorway to the living room, and I watched his face as he took it all in. The twins hadn't noticed him yet. Jones was making vrooming sounds as he pushed a toy car across the rug. Carissa had abandoned her elephant and was now attempting to climb onto the couch, her tongue poking out in concentration. "They're so big," James whispered. "I know that sounds stupid. I just saw them yesterday, but they're so big." "They're almost 18 months, I said. "Time moves differently when you're living it alone." He swallowed hard. How do I? "Just sit down," I said, softer now despite myself. "Let them come to you. Don't force it." James nodded and moved slowly into the room, sinking onto the floor near where Jones was playing. He kept his movements careful, controlled, like he was afraid a sudden gesture might shatter the moment. Jones looked up. James's blue eyes, studied this new person with the intense scrutiny only toddlers can manage. He clutched his toy car against his chest protectively. "Hi, Jones," James said, voice barely above a whisper. I'm James." Jones blinked. Then, to my complete shock, he stood up and toddled over. Not to me. Not away from the stranger. Toward James. My heart climbed into my throat. Jones stopped inches away from James's knee and stared up at him with that serious expression he made when he was figuring something out. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted both arms in the universal toddler sign for pick-me-up. James froze. His eyes went wide. His hands hovered in the air, shaking so badly I could see it from across the room. "Can I?" he asked, looking at me with such desperate hope that something inside my chest cracked open. I nodded. "Go ahead." James reached out with movements so careful, so reverent, you'd think Jones was made of spun glass. His large hand slid under Jones's small arms, and he lifted him gently, settling our son against his chest. Jones immediately rested his head on James's shoulder. Just like that. No fear, no hesitation. As if some part of him recognized the man holding him. "Da?" Jones said softly, his little hand fisting in James's sweater. "Not Dad. Not Daddy." Just that fragment of a word that children use before language fully forms. But it was enough. James broke. Not a quiet, dignified breakdown. Not the controlled grief of a man accustomed to maintaining appearances. He shattered. His face crumpled. His shoulders shook. And then he was sobbing deep, wrenching sounds that seemed pulled from somewhere primal and raw, his face buried against Jones's small shoulder, one hand cradling the back of his son's head, like it was the most precious thing in the world. "I'm sorry," he choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Jones, confused but not scared, patted James's hair with chubby fingers. "Da sad." That only made James cry harder. I stood frozen in the doorway, my own eyes burning. This was not the man I'd married. That man would have died before crying in front of anyone. That man wore his control like armor, his composure like a weapon. This man was falling apart in my living room, holding our son for the first time, and I couldn't look away. Carissa, drawn by the commotion, climbed down from the couch and waddled over. She stopped beside James, tilting her head in that bird-like way she had when something puzzled her. "Man crying," she announced matter-of-factly. James lifted his head, tears still streaming down his face, and found himself staring at his daughter. She had my nose, my mouth, but those eyes, sharp and blue and impossibly perceptive, were all him. "Hi, Carissa," he whispered. She studied him for a long moment. Then, with the decisiveness of someone who'd made up her mind, she reached out and wrapped her tiny hand around his index finger, and didn't let go. James looked down at her hand, so small it couldn't even reach all the way around, and more tears spilled down his cheeks. "Can I hold you too?" he asked, voice breaking on every word. Carissa considered this. Then, she lifted her free arm. James shifted Jones to one side and lifted Carissa with his other arm, pulling both twins against his chest. He closed his eyes, and I watched him breathe them in their baby shampoo smell, their warmth, their realness. "I missed everything," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "All their firsts, their first words, their first steps. All of you." His eyes opened and found mine across the room. The grief in them was oceanic. "I can't get that back," he said. "Can I?" "No," I said honestly. My voice came out thick. "You can't." He nodded, accepting the weight of that truth, and pressed his face against Carissa's hair. Jones had gone quiet, content to be held. Carissa still gripped James's finger like it was a lifeline. And James sat there on my living room floor, surrounded by toys and mismatched furniture, and the life he'd missed, looking more at peace than I'd ever seen him. And I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but something else. Shared grief. The understanding that we'd both lost something. That the past year had carved pieces out of both of us. That these children, perfect and oblivious, were the bridge between two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. You know, If you've ever watched someone realize what they lost, really see it for the first time, you know how heavy that moment feels. If this story is hitting you, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that people can change. Because we're just getting to the part where everything gets complicated. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. They have your stubbornness, I said quietly. Jones refuses to take his shoes off at nap time. Carissa argues with me about every meal. James let out a watery laugh. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's... I paused, searching for the word. It's them. He looked at me, really looked, and something passed between us. Not love, not even trust, but recognition. We were parents. Complicated, damaged, uncertain parents. But parents, nonetheless. Jones yawned, his little body going boneless against James's chest. Carissa's grip on his finger finally loosened as her eyes grew heavy. They're getting sleepy, I said. Nap time is in about 20 minutes. Can I? James hesitated. Can I stay until they fall asleep? Every instinct screamed at me to say no. To protect myself from the dangerous hope blooming in my chest. The hope that whispered, maybe things could be different. Maybe people could change. Maybe broken things could be repaired if you were willing to hold all the sharp edges. But when I looked at my children, peaceful in their father's arms, I couldn't find the word. Yes, I said instead. You can stay. James closed his eyes again, and this time when a tear slid down his cheek, it looked like relief. And somewhere deep inside me, in a place I'd thought had gone permanently cold last Christmas, something small and fragile stirred back to life. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, terrifying hope. I tried to push it away, but it had already taken root. James came back on Thursday, then Saturday, then Monday, then every other day that week until it stopped feeling like visits and started feeling like something else entirely. Routine. That word terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Up, Dada, Jones shouted the third time James walked through my door, arms already extended before James had even taken off his coat. Dada. Not da. Not a questioning fragment. A complete word, a title, a claim. James had frozen, his hand still on the doorknob, looking at me with an expression that asked, "Is this okay?" I'd nodded. What else could I do? Tell my son he couldn't call his father by his name? But watching James lift Jones into the air, watching my son giggle with pure delight, I felt something twist in my chest. Joy and grief braided so tightly together, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Now here's what most people don't understand about second chances. They're not clean. They're not neat. They're messy and complicated. And every single day is a choice. Keep watching, because what happens next will test everything. Mama said no cookies before lunch, Carissa informed James solemnly on his fifth visit, hands on her hips in a stance she'd learned from me. James had knelt to her level, serious as a boardroom negotiation. Your mama is absolutely right. What if we have apple slices instead? She'd considered this. With peanut butter? If your mama says it's okay. They both turned to look at me. I'd laughed despite myself. Fine, but you're cleaning up the mess. James had grinned, actually grinned, and said, deal. And that's how my ex-husband ended up learning to cut apple slices into shapes, while my daughter directed him like a tiny executive. He was trying. That was the part that undid me. James Baker, a man who'd never changed a diaper, never sang a lullaby, never wiped tears from a toddler's face, was learning. I watched him fumble with diaper tabs, putting them on backwards twice, before getting it right. Watched him read the same board book 17 times in a row, because Jones kept saying, again. Watched him Google how to handle toddler tantrums on his phone, when Carissa had a meltdown over the wrong color cup. He didn't hire help, didn't delegate, didn't try to buy his way into competence. He just showed up, failed, tried again. And slowly, impossibly, got better. This is a mistake, Dawn said on the second week. She'd cornered James in my kitchen while I was putting the twins down for a nap. I heard their voices through the baby monitor I'd forgotten to turn off. You don't get to do this, Dawn said, voice low and sharp. You don't get to walk back into their lives like nothing happened. I know. James's voice was quiet. Steady. You're right. I watched her break, James. I held her while she cried herself to sleep. I was there when she gave birth to your children alone, Because you were too busy building an empire. I know, he said again. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that. Regret doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. A pause. But maybe being here does. Maybe showing up every day, learning to be the father they deserve. Maybe that's a start. And what about Lucia? Dawn's voice cracked. What happens when you decide this is too hard? When the novelty wears off and you remember you have a company to run, then I'll figure it out. I'll hire more managers. Delegate. Work remotely. His voice grew firmer. I'm not leaving them again. Any of them. She doesn't believe you. I know. That's why I'm not asking her to. I'm just asking her to let me prove it. Silence. Then Dawn's voice, softer but still wary. If you hurt her again, I will make your life a living hell. I'd expect nothing less. I'd turned off the monitor then, my hands shaking, not sure what I'd just heard. A promise? A performance? I didn't know. That night, after James had left and the twins were asleep, I sat alone in my living room and battled the war raging inside my head. Trust felt like stepping off a cliff. Every time I watched James with Jones and Carissa, every time I saw him patient and gentle and present, part of me wanted to believe, but the other part remembered divorce papers on marble countertops, remembered the blankness in his eyes when I'd asked if he loved me, remembered building a life from ashes while he'd moved on without looking back. Trauma doesn't heal just because someone apologizes. It sits in your bones, whispering warnings, reminding you that safety is an illusion, and people always leave eventually. Tell me what you're thinking, James said one afternoon. The twins were playing in the backyard, visible through the window. James and I were cleaning up lunch dishes, a routine that had developed without either of us discussing it. I don't know what you mean, I said, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. You do. He dried a cup slowly, deliberately. You get this look, like you're somewhere else, somewhere painful. I set down the sponge. What do you want me to say, James? That I'm fine? That watching you play dad is easy? No. I want you to tell me the truth. The truth. The truth was complicated, and messy, and hurt to look at directly. I'm terrified, I admitted. Every time you walk through that door, I'm terrified it'll be the last time, that you'll wake up one day and remember why you left. That the twins will get attached and you'll... My voice broke. I can survive you leaving me again. I've done it before. But them? James set down the towel and turned to face me fully. My therapist has this thing, she says. He began carefully. She says I was so afraid of becoming my father that I fulfilled my own prophecy. I destroyed my marriage to avoid becoming the man who destroyed his marriage. I stared at him. It sounds stupid when I say it out loud, he continued. But it's true. I was so convinced I'd hurt you that I hurt you. And then I spent a year learning that running from fear doesn't make it go away. It just makes you a coward. So what changed? I asked. What makes this time different? He looked out the window at our children. Jones was showing Carissa a rock he'd found. She was nodding seriously, as if he'd just revealed a great secret. I learned that being a good father isn't about being perfect, James said quietly. It's about showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He turned back to me. I can't change the past, but I can change what I do right now, today, and tomorrow, and every day after that. It was the kind of thing that sounded good in theory, but I'd lived through enough broken promises to know words were just air, until they were backed by action. Still, he kept showing up. By the third week, something shifted. The twins stopped treating James like a visitor, and started treating him like theirs. Carissa would toddle to him first when she fell and scraped her knee. Jones would bring him books to read without prompting. They'd both light up when they heard his car in the driveway. And every time I witnessed it, I felt that dangerous hope grow a little stronger. One evening, I came downstairs after putting away laundry to find the living room quiet. Too quiet. I rounded the corner and stopped in the doorway. James was on the couch, his head tilted back against the cushions, mouth slightly open in sleep. Carissa was curled against his chest, her thumb in her mouth, her other hand fisted in his shirt, both of them breathing slow and deep. Peaceful. They looked peaceful. My throat tightened. This was the scene I'd imagined 1,000 times during my pregnancy, the father and daughter I'd grieve for, the family portrait with one person missing. But here it was. Real, whole, terrifyingly fragile. I pulled out my phone and took a picture before I could stop myself. Evidence. Of what? I wasn't sure. James stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw me standing there, he started to move. "Don't," I whispered. "You'll wake her." He stilled, looking down at Carissa with an expression of such tender wonder that I had to look away. "How long was I out?" he asked softly. 20 minutes. Maybe. She just climbed up and fell asleep. She does that when she feels safe. The words hung between us, weighted with meaning neither of us was ready to unpack. James looked at me then, and something passed across his face. Gratitude, longing, fear that mirrored my own. "Lucia, don't," I said. "Whatever you're about to say, just don't." "Not yet." He nodded. And we stayed there in the half-light of my living room, my daughter asleep on her father's chest. Both of us pretending we weren't standing on the edge of something that could either save us or destroy what little peace we'd found. That night, after James had left and the twins were in bed, my phone buzzed. A text from Dawn. "Have you seen this?" Below it, a link. My stomach sank before I even clicked it. The headline stared back at me in bold, invasive letters. "Billionaire James Baker spotted with mystery woman and children, new family." Below it, a grainy photo. James getting out of his car outside my house. A figure in the window that could have been me. And if you looked closely, very closely, a child's toy visible on the porch. My quiet life. My safe, anonymous life. About to be shattered by the man I'd let back in. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, and wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Rumors move faster than truth. By Monday morning, my quiet little street in Moore Ridge looked like the outskirts of a movie premiere if the movie were about my humiliation. 2 vans, 3 cars, long lenses, coffee cups, people loitering with professional casualness near my driveway. I pulled the curtain back 2 inches and felt my stomach lurch. They'd found us? "Outside," Dawn said grimly, standing at my shoulder. "They're actually outside your house." The twins were in the living room, blissfully unaware, feeding crackers to a stuffed bear. Jones was narrating the bear's entire life story. Carissa was correcting his facts. "Turn on the TV," I whispered. We didn't need to. My phone buzzed. Again. Messages flooding in old college friends, distant relatives, unknown numbers. The same screenshot kept popping up. An interview clip. James's former assistant, Miller, sitting very straight in an expensive suit on some business news show, wearing the blandly remorseful expression of a man who'd practiced it in the mirror. "Of course, Mr. Baker is a very private man," Miller was saying, voice smooth. "But I will say this, it's concerning when someone from the past appears with children, claiming connections. Powerful men are often targets. There are women who know exactly what they're doing." The host's eyes gleamed. "Are you suggesting this woman trapped him? With children?" Miller lifted his hands, mock innocent. "I'm just saying, timing is everything. And some people see opportunity where others see family." Dawn muted the sound before the roar in my ears could get any louder. "Opportunity," I said, my voice so calm it scared me. He called me an opportunity. Can you imagine? Being called an opportunist for raising your own children alone? If you've ever been blamed for someone else's choices, drop a comment. Because this is the part that makes my blood boil. And if you're still watching, subscribe because Miller's about to get exactly what he deserves. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was James. I let it ring. A car door slammed outside. Then another. Voices. Movement. "Lucia," Dawn said carefully, "you should see this." She handed me her own phone. Another clip. Another headline. "Billionaire's ex-wife resurfaces with twins, gold digger or devoted mother." Comments scrolled beneath it faster than I could read. She planned this. Of course she got pregnant right when he filed for divorce. Look at her classic small-town upgrade story. They didn't know me. Not my sleepless nights. Not the test I'd taken alone in a rental bathroom. Not the single missed call that never reached him. But they had an opinion. They always did. A knock rattled the front door, sharp and insistent. "Miss Gibson," a male voice called. "Lucia, can we speak to you about Mr. Baker and the children?" Just a few questions. Another voice, female, overlapped. Lucia, do you have a comment about Miller's statement? Did you hide the twins to manipulate the divorce settlement? Dawn's eyes flashed. I'll call the police, she hissed. Not yet, I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed level. The second this becomes a scene, we give them exactly what they want. What do you call this? She gestured toward the window. A knitting circle. Another knock, harder this time. Jones looked up. Mama? Noise. It's okay, baby, I said, forcing a smile. Just birds. He frowned. Birds don't knock. Smart. Too smart. My phone rang again. James. I answered this time. What did you do? I said, without preamble. On the other end, his breath hitched. Lucia, are you okay? I just saw the interview. I'm in the car. I'm on my way. Don't you dare come here, I snapped. Lucia. They're on my lawn, James. They're shouting my name. My kids can hear them. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world is poison. This is why I kept them hidden. Silence. A raw, stunned kind. I didn't know Miller was going to say any of that, he said finally, voice rough. He wasn't authorized. I've already called legal. He'll retract. Oh, a retraction, I cut in. Will that unprint the headlines? Unpost the clips? Crawl into every phone and delete the comments? Outside, someone called. Lucia, why didn't you tell him about the twins sooner? Were you afraid he'd leave you again? Dawn swore under her breath. Let me send security, James pleaded. Right now. They'll clear the street. I'll have lawyers draft a statement. We'll file harassment claims. You don't have to deal with this alone. There it was. The offer I'd known was coming. Protection, power, lawyers. All the tools of his world, laid at my feet like a peace offering. The last time he'd offered to take care of me, I'd signed my name on divorce papers and walked out of a life that almost swallowed me whole. Lucia, he said, panic creeping into his voice. Say something. Please. You fix things by owning them, I said quietly. Not by sending a wall of money in front of them. I am owning it, he insisted. I hired Miller. I let him into my inner circle. His choices are on me. So let me fix what I can. A pretty say. Mako. A pretty say. What you can't fix, I said, is that I'm the one being called a liar on national TV. I'm the one whose inbox is full of people asking if I trapped you, my clients. James, do you understand? They're canceling contracts. They don't want the scandal. My email had started pinging 20 minutes earlier. We regret to inform you. In light of recent media coverage, we need to pause this project until further notice. It was happening again. The ground shifting beneath my feet because of a man's decisions in a room I was never invited into. I'll cover your income, James said immediately. Every lost client. Every canceled project. You won't have to worry about money, I promise you that. He meant it as comfort. It landed like a cage. This is what you don't understand, I said, my voice breaking free of the numb shell it had grown around itself. I don't want your money. I want my life. The one I built without you. The one that didn't include reporters on my doorstep and talking heads discussing my uterus on morning television. Outside, a camera flash lit up the edges of the curtain. Mama? Carissa's small voice. People outside. I turned away from the window, from the phone, from everything that wasn't the two small faces looking up at me, with fear creeping into their eyes. It's okay, I lied again. Come play in your room. We're having an indoor adventure today. Dawn herded them down the hall, shooting me a look that said, end this. On the line, James's breathing had gone ragged. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Lucia, I never wanted. You never thought, I said. That's the problem. Not wanting this and not preventing it are the same thing when you're you. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, the sound brittle. You chose a public life. You chose power and headlines and being James Baker, the Ice King. I didn't. I chose a small house and a cheap stroller and anonymity. And now, because you decided to get your act together a year too late, I'm bleeding for your past. He didn't argue. The quiet on his end was worse than any defense. A car engine revved somewhere through the receiver. I pictured him in the back of a black sedan, jaw clenched, tie loosened, tearing through traffic. Lucia, he said finally, I'm firing him. I don't care. I'm terminating Miller's contract, and I'm issuing a public statement. I'm naming you. I'm saying you didn't trap me, that I left before I knew, that the fault is mine. The room spun. You will not drag my name deeper into this, I said. Do you hear me? I don't want to be a statement. I don't want strangers knowing that much of my life. If I don't say anything, the narrative stands, he argued. Silence looks like agreement. I can't let them paint you as what? I demanded. As the pathetic ex-wife who had the audacity to raise his children without his blessing? He exhaled shakily. As something you're not. Another knock rattled the door. Someone jiggled the handle. I jumped. Miss Gibson, just one picture of the twins. Are they his? Can you smile for us? That did it. For the record, I said, my voice turning to steel, this is why I didn't tell you. Not because I wanted money, not because I wanted leverage, because all of this is your shadow. It follows you everywhere. It chews up anything soft. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, older. You're right. I know. I thought I could keep those worlds separate, he said. Business and personal. Empire and family. I was wrong. They bleed into each other. And you're paying for that bleed. Yes, I said. I am. I'm almost there, he added. 2 streets away. James, just let me stand between you and them, he said quickly. You don't have to open the door. You don't even have to see me. I'll get them off your lawn. I'll give a quote, smile for their cameras, tell them this is old news and they can go back to whatever scandal is next on the list. Let me take the hit this time. I looked at the door, at the shadows moving under the crack of light, at the way my hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against the wall to steady myself. I didn't want him here. I also didn't want to walk out there alone. 5 minutes later, from the back hallway window, I watched his car pull up. He stepped out into the chaos like he was made for it, shoulders back, chin lifted, the old armor sliding over the rawness I'd seen in my living room. The cameras surged forward. Questions flew like hail. Mr. Baker, did she trap you? Are those your children? Did you know about the twins? He lifted a hand. They actually stopped. My ex-wife, James said, his voice clear even from where I stood, is not a trap. The yard fell silent. She did not come to me for money, he continued. She did not leak this story. She has done everything she can to protect our children from the world I built. Any speculation to the contrary is false, and frankly, disgusting. Miller's interview played in the back of my mind. The smug tilt of his head. The invitation to smear. One more thing, James added, and now there was iron in his tone. Any continued harassment of Lucia or the children at this address will be met with legal action. You want a quote? Talk to my office, but you leave them out of it. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a dozen hands shot up at once. Are you confirming the twins are yours? Is there a reconciliation? Are you back together? Do you regret the divorce now that I stepped away from the window? Enough. 15 minutes later, the crowd had thinned. Not gone, not completely, but the front yard no longer looked like a press conference. There was a soft knock at the back door. The one that opened into the kitchen, out of sight from the street. Lucia, James called quietly. It's me. Dawn appeared at the hallway entrance, arms folded. He's not coming in if you say no. I believed her. I opened the door. He stood there without a coat, hair mussed from the wind, tie missing, exhausted, eyes searching my face like he needed permission to breathe. You shouldn't have come, I said. I know, he answered, but I'm glad I did. Of course you are, I muttered, turning away. You get to be the hero. Again. I wasn't trying to be a hero, he said, closing the door gently. I was trying to be accountable. The twins peeked from the hallway, sensing a shift in the air. Dada? James smiled at them, small and soft. Hi, you two. They ran to him as if nothing outside had happened at all. As if the world hadn't just tried to turn their existence into content. He knelt, pulled them both in, closed his eyes for half a second. I watched his hands. They were steady. Go play in your room, I told them gently. I need to talk to Dada. Carissa looked between us, like she wanted to argue. Then, Apparently deciding it wasn't worth missing her sticker book, she grabbed Jones's hand and tugged him down the hall. When they were gone, the silence pressed in. "You didn't have to say I'm your ex-wife," I said quietly. "You could have just said Lucia." He blinked. I thought, I was respecting your distance. "You were putting a label on me that people can use to find me," I replied. "Ex-wife, twins, town, they'll stitch it together." Pain flickered across his face. "I'm sorry. I thought being clear would protect you. I keep getting this wrong." "Yes," I said simply. "You do." He swallowed. "Tell me how to get it right." "You can't." The words came out before I could filter them. Honest, brutal, necessary. "I can't risk letting you in fully," I said. Each syllable carved from the last year of my life. "Not again. Not when your world crashes into mine like this. Not when every mistake you make ricochets through my house." He looked like I'd hit him. "You're doing the right things with them," I continued, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "You show up. You're patient. You're trying. And they love you. I won't take that from them." He nodded slowly, his throat working. "But me?" I shook my head. "My heart is not a rehab center for the damage your father did to you. I can't be where you prove you've changed." A long, painful beat. "I don't want you to be a test," he said hoarsely. "I want you to be you. Who you've always been. The person I was, too blind and afraid to deserve." "Then you should have thought of that before you closed that briefcase," I replied. "Before you called me a distraction." He closed his eyes. The memory hurt us both. It always would. When he opened them again, there was something resolute in his gaze. Not the brittle determination of the man I used to know. Something quieter, deeper. "Give me one last chance," he said softly. "Not at us. Not at the marriage. Just at showing you who I am now. At proving that my world doesn't have to destroy yours. Let me earn a place that doesn't cost you everything." I wanted to say no. The words sat heavy on my tongue. But behind him, down the hallway, I heard the twins laughing. Jones's high squeal. Carissa's dramatic fake sigh. The sound pulled at me. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "I don't know if I should. I don't know," he said, a wry, broken half-smile, ghosting across his face. "It's better than never." I looked at him. At the man whose choices had shattered my life. At the father my children were already beginning to love. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just deciding whether to let my past back. Continue. I'll complete the full script now. I was deciding whether to let their future include him. "I don't know, James," I repeated, softer now. "But you're right about one thing." "What's that?" "Never would have been easier." His smile vanished. "Then I won't waste I don't know," he said quietly. And for the second time in my life, I watched James Baker walk out my door. Only this time, he left a question hanging in the air instead of a period. The snow started falling 3 days before Christmas. Soft at first, gentle. The kind that makes everything look like a snow globe pretty. Distant, contained. By evening, it had turned vicious. I stood at my kitchen window watching the wind whip flakes into angry spirals, watching the street disappear under white, and felt the memory of last year press against my ribs like a bruise that never healed. Last Christmas, James had ended us. This Christmas, I was trying to decide if there was anything left to save. He hadn't visited in 4 days. Not since the media storm. Not since I'd told him I couldn't risk letting him in. He'd texted twice, once to ask if the twins needed anything, once to send a photo of a toy Jones had left in his car. Nothing about us. Nothing pushing. Just present. Waiting. I hated how much I noticed his absence. "Dada coming?" Jones had asked that morning, nose pressed to the window. "Not today, baby. The snow's too bad. But Dada drives good." Carissa had looked up from her coloring book, solemn. "Mama sad?" "No, sweetheart, Mama's fine." She'd studied me with those impossibly blue eyes, his eyes, and said, "Mama fibbing." 2 years old, and already calling me out. Now, at 8:30 at night, with both of them finally asleep after an hour of bedtime negotiations, I stood in my kitchen and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Fear, anger, grief, hope. That last one was the most dangerous. Hope whispered that people could change, that therapy worked, that love, real love, could survive being shattered if you were willing to hold the pieces carefully enough. but trauma shouted louder. It reminded me of cold marble countertops and divorce papers, and the way James's voice had sounded when he'd called me a distraction. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, my phone buzzed. A text from Dawn. Roads are getting bad. You good? Me. We're fine, staying in. Dawn. Smart. Some idiot will probably try to drive in this anyway. I smiled despite myself and set the phone down. That's when I heard it. A car door. My head snapped toward the window. Through the curtain of falling snow, I could barely make out headlights. A dark shape. Movement. Who would be out in this? Then the shape became a person. Tall, broad shoulders hunched against the wind. No umbrella, no coat, or if there was one, it was soaked through and useless. He moved up my walkway like he was fighting a current, snow already coating his hair, his clothes. My heart stopped. No, I whispered. James, what are you? The knock came before I could finish the thought. Not polite, not tentative, desperate. I yanked open the door, and the wind nearly tore it from my hands. James stood on my porch, drenched. His shirt clung to him, dark with melted snow and rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or emotion, I couldn't tell. What are you doing? I demanded, stepping back to let him in before I could think better of it. You could have gotten yourself killed driving in this. He stumbled inside, breathing hard, and pushed the door closed against the storm. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Water dripped from his clothes onto my floor. His lips had a faint blue tint. His whole body trembled. You're freezing, I said, instinct overriding everything else. Stay here. I ran to the bathroom, grabbed 2 towels, and came back to find him still standing in the exact same spot. Frozen. Not from the cold. From fear? James, I shoved a towel at him. Dry off before you get hypothermia. He took it automatically but didn't move, just stared at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I couldn't wait anymore, he said, voice raw. I tried. I gave you space. But then, I realized that's what I did last time. I stayed silent. I convinced myself distance was respect. And I lost everything. James, I'm not him anymore, he cut in, taking a step closer. Water squelched in his shoes. The man who left you, the man who was too afraid to fight. I'm not him, Lucia. I swear to you, I'm not. My throat tightened. You drove through a snowstorm to tell me that. I drove through a snowstorm because I'm terrified you're going to give up on me, he said, his voice cracking. And I can't lose you again. Any of you. Not without trying everything. The desperation in his eyes was so raw it hurt to look at. What do you want me to say? I asked, my own voice breaking. That it's fine? That we can just pretend the last year didn't happen? No, he shook his head, snow falling from his hair. I want you to let me prove I've changed. I'll do anything. Parenting classes. More therapy. I'll move to Moor Ridge full-time. I'll sell the penthouse. I'll step back from the company. Whatever it takes. You can't just uproot your entire life. Why not? He challenged. You did. You left everything you knew and built a life from nothing. Why can't I do the same? Because you're James Baker, I said. Your life is public. Your decisions move markets. You can't just watch me. The certainty in his voice stopped me cold. He took another step forward, and now we were close enough that I could see the way his chest heaved with each breath. Could see the desperation and determination warring in his expression. Lucia, he said, softer now. I know I don't deserve this. I know I destroyed your trust. But I'm begging you. Please don't shut me out. Let me be part of their lives. Let me show you that I can be the man you needed me to be 2 years ago. The walls I'd built so carefully began to crack. This is it. The moment where everything changes. If you've ever had to decide whether to trust someone who broke you, you know how impossible this feels. Stay with me. We're almost at the ending, and I promise you it's worth it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, because you need to see how this ends. I'm scared, I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I'm scared that if I let you in, I'll lose myself again. That I'll become the person I was in that penthouse, small, secondary, invisible. You were never invisible, James said fiercely. You were the only thing I saw. That's why I ran. Because you made me feel too much. Want too much. Need too much. And I didn't know how to handle that. And now you do? No, he laughed, broken and honest. I still don't. But I'm learning. Every day. With every book I read to Jones, every tantrum I navigate with Carissa, every time I wake up and choose to be better than I was yesterday. My vision blurred. I watched you collapse, I whispered. Last week, in my living room. I watched the Ice King break down and sob into our son's shoulder. I'm not the Ice King anymore, he said. That man was armor, protection, a wall I built so I wouldn't feel the things my father felt. But all it did was kill the things worth feeling. James, I love you, he said. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and inevitable all at once. I never stopped loving you, he continued, his voice shaking. Even when I left, even when I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, you were the last thing I thought about every night and the first thing I thought about every morning. And it took losing you to realize that running from fear is just another kind of cowardice. I couldn't breathe. You don't have to love me back, he said quickly. You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to like me. Just don't give up on the possibility that maybe, someday, we could be something again. Even if it's just co-parents who don't hate each other. I don't hate you, I said, and realized it was true. I was angry. I was hurt. I was terrified. But I didn't hate him. Then what do you feel? He asked, searching my face. I feel everything, all at once, and I don't know how to sort through it. Then don't, he said. Not yet. Just give me time. Give me a chance to prove that the man standing in front of you isn't the man who left. Behind me, I heard a soft sound. Small feet on hardwood. Mama. I turned. Jones stood in the hallway, clutching his stuffed elephant, eyes wide. Behind him, Carissa rubbed sleep from her face. Dada, Jones said, spotting James. Then, seeing the tears on his father's face, his own face crumpled. Dada sad. James dropped to his knees, not caring about the puddle forming around him, and opened his arms. Both twins ran to him. He gathered them close, pressing his face into their small shoulders, and I watched him tremble with the effort of holding himself together. I'm okay, he whispered to them. I'm okay, I promise. But Carissa pulled back, her little hand touching his wet cheek. Crying, she said matter-of-factly. Sometimes grown-ups cry, James told her softly, when they're scared or sad or when they want something very much. What Dada want? Jones asked. James looked past them, straight at me. I want us to be a family, he said. All four of us. The twins looked at me too, their expressions so earnest, so hopeful. And I felt something inside me give way. Not break, give. Like ice thawing after a long winter. It's late, I said, my voice thick. You two need to be in bed. But Dada, Jones started. We'll be here in the morning, I said, making a decision before I could talk myself out of it. If he wants to be. James's head snapped up. Hope and fear and desperate gratitude all flickered across his face. I mean the guest room has clean sheets, I said. And you're not driving home in this storm. And tomorrow? I trailed off, not sure how to finish. Tomorrow? James prompted softly. Tomorrow we'll talk, really talk, about what this could look like. No promises, no guarantees, just possibility. He closed his eyes, and I saw his shoulders sag with relief, so profound it looked like pain. Thank you, he breathed. Lucia, thank you. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dawn was going to kill me. But as I watched James stand, a twin in each arm, carrying them back toward their bedroom, I realized something. For the first time since he'd walked back into my life, I wasn't running from my fear. I was walking toward hope, even if that hope was terrifying. Even if it might break me again. I followed them down the hallway and stood in the doorway, as James tucked Jones and Carissa back into their beds with a gentleness that made my heart ache. Love you, Carissa mumbled, already half asleep. James went still. I love you too, sweetheart, he whispered. So much. When he finally stepped out of their room, he found me still standing there. We looked at each other in the dim hallway light. Snow still melted in his hair. His shirt still clung to him. He looked exhausted and hopeful and scared. Human. Guest room is at the end of the hall, I said quietly. Towels in the closet. There might be clothes that fit in the dresser. Dawn's brother left some things here. Okay, he didn't move. Lucia? Yeah? I meant what I said. Every word. I believed him. That was the terrifying part. I know, I said. Now go change before you catch pneumonia. He smiled, small, genuine, grateful, and walked past me toward the guest room. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet sounds of him moving in the next room. Last Christmas, he'd broken me. This Christmas, I was choosing to let him try to earn me back. The door to his room was open a crack. Not closed. Not fully open. Just possible. And maybe, I thought as I finally headed to my own room, maybe that was enough for now. 1 year ago, I'd signed my name on divorce papers in a penthouse that smelled like expensive emptiness. This morning, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of James whispering frantic apologies to my smoke detector. Change, I'd learned, wasn't always poetic. Sometimes it was a man who'd run a billion-dollar empire standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, waving a dish towel at the ceiling while 2 toddlers giggled from their high chairs. I had it under control, James insisted, when I appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, trying very hard not to smile. That's why the smoke detector is screaming. It's temperamental. It's functional, I corrected, reaching past him to open the window. Cold December air rushed in, clearing the smoke. Unlike someone's toaster skills. Jones clapped. Dada made fire. Not fire, James said quickly. Just very enthusiastic toast. Carissa looked at her plate solemnly. I want cereal. I laughed then, the sound surprising me with how easy it felt. 3 months. That's how long it had been since the snowstorm, since the night James had shown up drenched and desperate on my doorstep. Since I'd left his door open just a crack and watched possibility slip through. The next morning, we'd talked. Really talked. Not about us, not yet, but about what co-parenting could look like, what boundaries we needed, what the twins deserved. I want to move here, James had said over coffee, his voice steady. To Moore Ridge, full-time. I'd stared at him. You can't just... I can, he'd interrupted gently. I've already started looking at properties. Nothing big, nothing flashy. Just close enough that the twins don't have to choose between houses. Close enough that I can be here. Every day. What about your company? I'm restructuring, he'd said. Promoting my VP to CEO. I'll stay on the board, consult remotely. But I won't be running day-to-day operations anymore. The words had sounded impossible. But 3 weeks later, I'd watched him sign a lease on a small rental house 4 streets from mine. 2 weeks after that, business journals had run the headline, James Baker steps back from Baker Hotel's new priorities? The comments had been predictably brutal. Pussy-whipped. She destroyed his ambition. He'll regret this in a year. But James hadn't flinched. Let them talk, he'd said when I'd shown him the articles. I spent 30 years building an empire I was afraid to lose. Now I'm building something I can't afford to lose. And he had. Slowly, patiently, with the same intensity he'd once brought to acquisitions, he learned the rhythms of our small-town life. He showed up for pediatrician appointments. He learned the names of the other parents at the park. He figured out that Jones needed exactly 4 minutes of warning before transitions, and that Carissa would only eat vegetables if they were hiding under cheese. He stopped checking his phone during meals. He started asking about my day. He rebuilt himself, brick by brick, into someone I didn't recognize. Someone better. And here's what I want you to understand. Real change isn't dramatic. It's not a movie moment. It's burnt toast on Christmas morning. It's showing up when it's inconvenient. If you believe in second chances, if you think people can really change, leave a comment below, because what I'm about to tell you might just restore your faith in love. Mama, Dada says Santa coming tonight, Jones announced, pulling me from my thoughts. Right. Christmas Eve. I looked at James, who had the grace to look sheepish. I might have gotten them excited, he admitted. Might have? Carissa has checked the window 6 times since breakfast. I shook my head, but I was smiling. You're on bedtime duty then. You hype them up, you calm them down. Deal. He paused. Then added quietly. Will you stay? For bedtime? All 4 of us? Something in his voice made me pause. Vulnerability, hope, The same combination that had been weaving itself into our interactions more and more lately. "Yeah," I said, "I'll stay." By 6 o'clock, my house looked like a Christmas tornado had hit it. Wrapping paper scattered across the floor. Cookies that James and the twins had decorated, massacred cooling, on the counter. A slightly lopsided tree that Jones had insisted on helping with standing in the corner. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was perfect. "Presents," Carissa shrieked, pointing at the wrapped boxes under the tree. "Tomorrow," I reminded her for the 18th time. "Santa comes tonight while you're sleeping." Her face fell dramatically. Then she turned to James. "Data, make tomorrow come faster." He knelt beside her. "Serious." I tried, but time doesn't listen to dads, not even billionaire ones. She considered this, then sighed with the weight of someone far older than two. "Okay." After dinner pizza, because I'd learned to pick my battles, James carried both twins upstairs for bath time. I cleaned up alone, listening to the sounds of splashing and laughter drifting down from above. This was what I'd imagined during my pregnancy, what I'd grieved when I'd given birth alone. A partner, a co-parent, someone to share the weight and the joy. And now I had it. Sort of. Because James and I still weren't anything. Not officially. We existed in this strange in-between space, more than co-parents, not quite together. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, something soft in his expression, and I'd feel the pull, the old familiarity mixed with something new. But I hadn't named it yet. Hadn't let myself. "Lucia," James called from upstairs, "can you grab Jones's elephant? He won't sleep without it." I found it wedged under the couch and carried it upstairs. Both twins were in their pajamas, hair damp, smelling like lavender baby wash. James was reading them a story, some tale about a snowman who learned to love winter. I handed Jones the elephant and sat on the edge of Carissa's bed. When the story ended, James kissed them both goodnight. "Love you, Dada," Jones mumbled, already half asleep. "Love you too, buddy." Carissa reached for me. "Mama too." I kissed her forehead. "Always, baby girl." We turned off the light and slipped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked. For a moment, neither of us moved. Just stood there in the dim hall, the house settling around us, the weight of the day giving way to something quieter. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please." Downstairs, I poured 2 cups, while James stood by the tree, hands in his pockets, staring at the lights. "I have something for you," he said suddenly. "James," we agreed. "Not a Christmas present," he interrupted. "Just something I need you to have." He reached into his bag, the one he always carried, full of parenting supplies now, instead of contracts, and pulled out a box. Not wrapped, just a simple wooden box, worn at the edges. He held it out. I took it slowly, confused. "What is this?" "Open it." I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some typed, some handwritten, all dated, all addressed to me. "These are," my voice trailed off, "copies of every letter I wrote during therapy," James said quietly. "You asked me to stop writing them, to say things to your face instead. But I wanted you to have them. To see that this, us, me trying it, isn't new. It's something I've been working toward for over a year." My hands trembled as I pulled out the first one. December 28th, 2 days after the divorce was finalized. I told myself I did the right thing. But right things aren't supposed to feel like dying. The next, January 15th. I saw a mother with twins today at the airport. I stared like a creep. Wondered if you'd ever have children. Hoped you would. Hoped they'd never have a father like me. I flipped through them, my vision blurring. Months of pain, growth, realization, regret. And then, near the bottom, one line stopped me cold. June 3rd. My therapist asked what I was most afraid of. I told her failure. She asked what my biggest success was. And I realized, loving her was the only thing I ever did right. The box slipped from my hands. James caught it, set it gently on the table. "Lucia, you loved me," I whispered. "Even when you left, you loved me." "I never stopped," he said, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to stay." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. All the grief I'd carried, all the anger, all the hope I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. It poured out of me in waves. James stepped forward, hesitant. "Can I?" I nodded. He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself break against his chest. I was so angry at you, I sobbed, for leaving, for missing everything, for making me do this alone. I know, he murmured into my hair. You had every right to be. But I never stopped loving you either, I admitted, and I hated myself for it, because how could I still love someone who destroyed me? He pulled back just enough to look at me, his own eyes wet. Because love isn't logical, he said. It's not clean or fair or convenient. It just is. I laughed through my tears. That's a terrible explanation. I know, he smiled, sad and honest. I'm still figuring this out. Me too. We stood there, foreheads touching, breathing each other in. I don't want to rush this, I said finally. I don't want to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. We can't just go back. I don't want to go back, James said. The man you married was broken in ways he didn't understand. I'd rather move forward. Slowly. As people who've learned to fix themselves first. Partners in healing, I said. Not a fairy tale. Better than a fairy tale, he corrected. Real. I looked up at him, at the man who'd left me and found his way back, at the father my children adored, at the person who'd spent a year writing letters to someone he thought he'd lost forever. Okay, I whispered. Okay? We try, slowly. No promises, no guarantees, just us, figuring it out. Hope bloomed across his face like sunrise. I'll take it, he breathed. And then, gently, carefully, like he was afraid I might disappear, he kissed me. It wasn't like our first kiss, urgent and passionate and young. This was softer, deeper, weighted with everything we'd lost and everything we were choosing to rebuild. When we pulled apart, I was crying again. But this time, they were different tears. Merry Christmas, Lucia, James whispered. I looked at the tree, the scattered toys, the box of letters sitting on my table. Last Christmas, he'd handed me divorce papers and walked away. This Christmas, he'd handed me his heart scarred and imperfect, and finally whole enough to offer. And if this story taught you anything about second chances, about forgiveness, about the courage it takes to rebuild, share it. Comment below and tell me, do you believe people can really change? Because I do now. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. You won't regret it. Merry Christmas, James, I said. And for the first time in 2 years, I believed in second chances. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because the future messy and uncertain and ours felt like something worth fighting for. Together. Last Christmas, he broke my heart. This Christmas, he helped me believe in second chances.